Hello and welcome back to Spinal Cast. I'm your host, David Stevens, and joining us today is Ryan Bouslog. Ryan is a physical therapist at the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs in Minnesota and specializes in neurological physical therapy. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So on today's episode of Spinal Cast, I think for our viewers at home, our real goal is to kind of just learn a little bit more about your specialized field of physical therapy, and then also, talk about your experience working with the VA and how that's been. And if that sounds all right to you, I just, I got a list of questions that I'd like to run through.
Sounds great. Let's get started.
All right, perfect. So in that case, how did you get into the neurologic physical therapy? Like what outside of other, forms of PT, why was it that the neuro kind of caught your eye or attention?
Yeah, so, I had a clinical rotation at the Minneapolis VA healthcare system when I was a student, and had a great experience there, and ultimately got hired right out of school. And I started in, and so the VA is all I know. Okay. And I started in just kind of general outpatient orthopedics, and bounced around in a number of different practice settings at the VA, but ultimately found my way down to the Spinal Cord Injury and Disorder Center. Okay. And I think the really unique aspects of our Spinal Cord Injury and Disorder Center is just, the equipment that's available, the assistive technology that's utilized, and the time we get to spend caring for those veterans is much greater than perhaps other areas of the hospital. Yeah,
no, I think that's awesome. Are there a large number of veterans that kind of need this neurological care?
Yeah, so the VA has a national registry for the various spinal cord injury and disorder centers, and we have about 1,400 veterans on our registry. And so we're Minneapolis is a spinal cord injury and disorder center, and there's 25 of those centers across the nation. Got it. And so if you think about it in terms of number of veterans on the registry, we're about the 6th largest. Okay.
And so as far as like the Minneapolis Center, is that primarily for Minneapolis residents, or can anyone from across the country come and, get help at the Minneapolis Center? Kind of how does that work?
Yeah, so we operate using a hub and spoke model of care. Okay. And so the Minneapolis SCID Center is a hub site. Got it. And we support VA facilities that are spinal cord injury spoke sites that are located in the surrounding 5 states. And so we have SCI spoke sites in North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, and then Minnesota as well. And so, it's a pretty big region.
It covers pretty much all the bases that I could think of at least in the Midwest region. And, kind of talking about how you guys are branched out around the U.S., it sounds like you have pretty clear coverage for anybody who's in need. So do those I guess maybe satellite's not the correct term, but those, off-center facilities, do they have all the same equipment as, say, the hub?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different. The SCI centers or hub sites really provide a large interdisciplinary kind of continuum of services. Okay. And so we have CARF accredited inpatient and outpatient rehab programs. We have some other specialty programs, so we're considered an ALS Center of Excellence. Okay. We have MS Regional Specialty Program. We have home care programming, and we also have virtual care as well. And so we have a wide array of services available. Right. Whereas the spoke sites, they play a really kind of critical role in our system of care in that they have kind of close relationships and connections to those veterans who maybe live much further from the different centers. And so they primarily focus on SCI primary care and then have some limited specialty care as well.
Got it. So occasionally I would assume then a patient might, experience some assistance at these, other centers, and then occasionally visit the hub for specific services or needs, right?
Yes. Okay. Yes, exactly. And so one of the really unique services that we provide is a annual kind of preventative health evaluation. Okay. And so it's multidisciplinary. Basically, it's a whole day of appointments with all the disciplines that are available within the SCI Center. And so you get, provider evaluation, PT, OT, speech, social work, dietitians, psychologists. Everyone can kind of have a point of contact with the veteran. And the focus is more on preventative care, on health promotion and education. Yeah. And then it also allows for kind of a year-to-year comparison for, a variety of tests and measures. And so it's really nice because it helps us to identify, smaller issues before they become big problems.
Well, absolutely. And from our experience interviewing people in this community, those small issues, if they're not noticed, do become very dangerous for them.
Yeah.
So I think that's huge. It also sounds like an incredible benefit to someone who's struggling with their injury, to have all of these things kind of in one place, as it were, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
And just being able to, get all of those things done, because I think it's daunting for anybody, myself included. When I get told I need to schedule these 4 appointments for these reasons, it's like, that's a lot. That's a lot to do.
Yeah.
And so, having kind of a spot that's helping in that sense, I think is huge. So
and I think just to add, one little thing to that, sometimes veterans are resistant to certain services. So, psychology, for example, or mental health care.
Fair enough.
Where if it was offered as an individual discipline, they would maybe decline. But yet if it's part of a structured, service, like the annual evaluation, then sometimes, it's a way that we can kind of get some contact with some disciplines that, they may
normally say no to.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a big thing because, mental health, as we all know, has been more and more of a a topic that people are bringing to the forefront. And I myself have had my own mental health struggles and found it incredibly helpful to talk to somebody else. And so I'm sure your guys' experiences, if we can get them in the door, they probably leave feeling better and go, oh, okay, maybe I was wrong about that. I should probably keep seeing somebody about that.
Yeah,
and so
of course.
That's huge. So kind of keying back on the veterans themselves, what kind of injuries are typical for a veteran? Is it normally, due to combat injury, or, something more along the lines of like, I served way back when, now in my older age, I had an accident, and, how does it normally play out?
Yeah, so in the Spinal Cord Injury and Disorder Center, we primarily serve veterans with spinal cord injuries, and they could be traumatic or non-traumatic.
Okay.
And then also multiple sclerosis, and then amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And so the acronym there is ALS, or sometimes referred to as Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yep.
So those are kind of the big three. And then there's some less common diagnoses that we also serve. So an example for that would be Guillain-Barré syndrome or hereditary spastic paraplegia.
Yeah, I guess I've never heard of either of those. So.
Yeah, a little less common, but still eligible for services through our center. And then, we serve veterans with a wide range of etiologies and across the lifespan. And so we have veterans who did, of course, sustain a spinal cord injury that occurred while in combat or when serving in the military. But then we have plenty of veterans who either were diagnosed with MS or had a spinal cord injury outside of their time of service.
Right.
And, equal access to care for our facility.
Well, that's huge. I mean, I think a lot of times, when I think of the VA, I always think about it's so wonderful that these veterans, they gave the ultimate sacrifice to, fight for our country, but the ability for them to then kind of at least have some real residual value when they do come home, that they can, continue to draw from no matter what their life experiences turn out to be. I think that's super, super major. So as I was poking around your website, and we already kind of touched on this SCI system of care, kind of the satellite offices around the hubs, kind of hub and spoke model is what you said, right? Okay, perfect. I'm catching on. So along with that, I also kind of came across this recovery program that you talked about. And so I was wondering if you could just kind of clue me in a little bit more on details around this specifically recovery program.
Yeah, so, research and development is definitely an area of focus for our Spinal Cord Injury and Disorder Center. we have a number of individuals who are involved in research, whether it be providers, nurses, therapists, and then we have a rather large team of engineers who kind of make up this Recover program. And I'm not going to try to tell you what the acronym stands for because it's pretty lengthy. The VA loves their acronyms, but really they look towards the application of kind of novel equipment and technology. And so they really put an emphasis on veteran feedback. There's a patient advisory panel that has the opportunity to provide feedback about upcoming studies or projects that they're interested in. And there's some really cool equipment that has come out of that and actually made it all the way to like the commercial market. And some examples would be an over-the-bed upper body ergometer. And so sometimes
what's an ergometer?
So it's like an arm bike.
Okay. I've seen those.
There's times that veterans have to be on prolonged bed rest, and so that gives them the ability to maintain their cardiovascular function to some extent while in bed. So that was created through that program. Also a wireless camera that was created and adapted so that an individual could do independent skin inspection. As pressure injuries and wounds are a big complication associated with people who have absent or impaired sensation.
Yeah, and they're typically in a spot that is not real easy to access or see yourself. So
images could be taken or videos recorded and sent directly to the veteran's healthcare provider.
Very cool. And so in previous episodes, we've talked to a handful of different researchers who are studying kind of different therapies, almost like assistive devices that are being either surgically implanted or attached to someone that give them kind of immediate relief or assistance. And it kind of seems to me like the whole SCI kind of community as a whole, there is this big push to get some functionality back or give them some more, individuality, a way that they can do things for themselves. And I think it's huge for the people who are injured. Are there any specific, technologies that you're using beyond these that are, helping these patients kind of be more what's the word?
Independent.
Independent.
Yeah, there we go. It's a big.
My guy Ryan coming in with the words.
I mean, one of the reasons why I'm most grateful to work at the VA is because of our access to equipment and assistive technology. And that's both kind of in the clinic and the equipment that we can use while treating and working with veterans, but also the clinician's ability to order and prescribe equipment for veterans to use at home and in the community.
Right.
At the Minneapolis SCI Center, we have a pretty nice therapy space. We have a whole variety of low-tech and high-tech equipment.
Cool.
Some of the higher-tech, flashier equipment might include, we have some robotic exoskeletons. We have functional electrical stimulation devices. We have a variety of body weight-supported gait training devices. We're lucky enough to have a HydroWorks pool. And so it has kind of the treadmill that is underwater. The floor elevates so you can change the depth. There's some cameras, jets, all the bells and whistles. But really all the devices that we have access to, and we feel very blessed to have access to these devices and equipment, just helps to amplify the interventions that's provided by our therapists.
Got it. Now, this kind of is a little bit of a caveat question or kind of offline a little bit, but I imagine people who are somewhat recently injured are still a little hesitant to do much or, very intimidated by the act of doing physical therapy. And I'm sure it's also very difficult and hard and at times maybe even painful. Do you have many patients that are not very receptive to the treatment or not as willing as others, or do you struggle with that at all?
I think that's kind of the bread and butter of the therapist's kind of toolkit is they always have option A, but then they have option B, C, D, E, you go down the alphabet. And so usually there's something that you can get that will engage the veteran and try and get them to participate more. I think always anytime we can identify tasks that are salient or meaningful to that individual, they're going to be more likely to engage. But yeah.
Okay. So kind of keying back to something you said a little bit earlier, you kind of referred to the fact that there's numerous departments that are doing some studies and research activity constantly. And I was wondering if you could just kind of, give us a little more insight on what types of research they're doing currently.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, a lot of the research focus within the SCI Center is towards the application of novel equipment and technology. Mm-hmm. One of the studies that just launched is looking at the application of a mobile standing manual wheelchair. And so there's not a standing manual wheelchair that's mobile that's available on the market today. And so it's kind of a novel intervention that our engineers came up with. Very cool. And they just started a study looking at kind of the application of that for our SCI veterans. Very cool.
So if I was, listening to this podcast or watching this podcast and I had recently been injured, I assume I would need to be a veteran in order to access these services. And let's say I am a veteran and I'm looking to access these services. Like, what's kind of the pathway to me, getting access to you or the individuals at the VA?
Yeah. So the kind of the first step is to establish primary care.
Okay.
Once that's established, then the primary care provider can put in a outpatient spinal cord injury and disorder consult that will evaluate for eligibility for our services, and then after that, you're eligible to receive services for life, basically.
Awesome. Actually, that kind of leads me to another obscure question, but how long are you typically with one of your patients? So, like, have you been seeing some of your patients for years and years and years? Or do patients kind of bounce around to different specialists, as it were?
Yeah, so I mean, there's all different examples for that question, but I think that makes me think about the medical mission for the VA is just a little bit different. And so we're not bound by some of the limitations that are present in some private sector facilities. And so we can have much longer relationships, with our patients and can have multiple episodes of care throughout a year, especially, if the patient's benefiting from the services that are being provided, we're going to continue providing those services.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to be able to, see a patient, establish a plan of care, determine whatever frequency and duration that you feel is most appropriate, and just put that in motion.
That's awesome. Well, and I suppose, there's these limitations that are put on, people who aren't veterans, who are, whether it be financial, insurance, all those things, there's just a lot that goes into it. And it gets expensive really fast. Actually, an interview we recently did, they kind of talked about what it costs to have a spinal cord injury. It's petrifying, just to imagine, in a split second, you went from being in a very comfortable place to being the poorest you've ever been. And it's just, it's daunting. So I think that's huge. So kind of, talking about all of these awesome therapies and research that's being done, exoskeletons, like I'm imagining like a mech suit, which is pretty cool. Are there any other kind of treatments that you've seen outside of the VA that you wish you guys were implementing right now, or anything that you have seen on the internet that you have brought to the team and said, like, maybe we should look at this?
Nothing that specifically comes to mind. I think,
they probably spend their entire day doing it, so that would make sense.
Yeah, but I think the point you make is valid in that the technology and how it's advanced over the past 10 years has been pretty unbelievable. And so just thinking about what is the provision of PT for the SCI patient population going to look like 30 years from now?
Yeah,
it could be completely different, and so. one example of how we really lean heavily on assistive technology and how it's integrated within our care is highlighted through our ALS clinic. And so, with ALS, the typical lifespan after diagnosis is 2 to 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And
I
so,
did not know that.
yeah, it's devastating. It's a devastating diagnosis. And typically includes or involves a pretty rapid kind of loss of function.
Decline, yeah.
And so with that, then we see, a significant need for assistive technology in order to maintain any type of independence. And so, a couple of devices that we'll lean on in those situations. One is a robotic feeding device.
Oh, cool.
And so, our occupational therapy team will set the patient up with a robotic feeder, and all they need to have is, just a little bit of finger movement, and they could operate a switch, and it could, trigger this robotic feeding device to scoop up some food and bring it to their mouth so that they can eat. And so, the idea of having a piece of equipment like that allows them to eat independently is really profound.
It's huge. And I'm sure for them, they're like, it's been, however many years since I ate on my own or whatever. And so that's a massive kind of improvement for them.
Yeah. To be able to just sit and, eat with your loved one as opposed to having them, take turns feeding themselves and you.
Exactly.
Is probably.
I want to eat my bowl of cereal without having to wake up my wife, right? Like, I totally get that. So that's kind of an interesting challenge that you highlight there is, just being able to do a minor function like feeding yourself. What are other kind of more common challenges that you see across the board with people who have suffered SCI injuries or disabilities that you're, very commonly addressing in your therapies?
I think accessibility is a huge challenge even now for individuals who are in wheelchairs. And
are you talking primarily like technology, like accessibility within technology, or just everywhere?
Well, I feel like that's actually improving way quicker than like
I would agree
structural,
with that.
accessibility.
I see what you're.
You're just thinking about the ramp outside of the office space here,
Absolutely.
right? Obviously, it's not ADA accessible, but I think that's where the therapy team really comes into play, is kind of looking right away at the veteran's home environment and what are the modifications that may be needed to be able to get them back home.
Got it.
And what are the community activities that they enjoy, and what are the barriers there, and how do we overcome those so they can participate in the things they enjoy.
Got it. No, I think that makes a lot more sense. Yeah, the accessibility as far as the computers and everything, it's been incredible to me. Our executive director, Peter Morton, he's a pretty severe quadriplegic, so he has very limited mobility, even just from the neck up. And his ability to read and draft an email, and I mean, just he's as responsive as anybody else on a computer,
course, yeah.
And it's been incredible to watch. So I just have a couple more here. I guess. We've talked a lot about the therapies and things that you're doing with these veterans, and I assume, given that you've been there for a little while, you're clearly having some positive feedback from it. But are you seeing good results with the patients that you're working with? Are you proud of the work that you're doing? And of course you're proud of the work you're doing, but are you seeing improvements? Is it giving you that I don't know, for lack of a better, like the zhuzh that makes you excited to go to work every day?
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple examples that jump to mind. One is that, we'll often have patients who come into our inpatient unit and their goal is to return to walking.
Yeah.
And so our therapists will work as hard as possible to try and help them accomplish that goal.
Right.
And, it's not uncommon to see a veteran regain the ability to walk, and then they'll walk out of the center when they're discharging, and we'll kind of line the halls and everyone will cheer them on. Usually there's some like Rocky music playing in the background.
Heck yeah.
But there's a lot of stories like that are really meaningful, and maybe it's not as big as walking. Maybe it's that they're able to drive their power wheelchair out independently.
Right.
And so that little bit of function made all the difference.
Totally.
But we have a bunch of surveys and outcomes that we track, and I think across the SCI system of care, they're all looking really good. And one of the survey questions that's asked is if you could receive free healthcare outside of the VA, would you? And almost rarely do we ever get anyone say yes to that question. And so I think that means a lot to us. That's a really important question.
It says a lot about the care that you're giving and how, how you're treating everybody and what is offered there. So that's fantastic. So let's say someone's watching or listening and they are very interested in physical therapy, and primarily they're finding this really, entertaining and find what you do really cool. What kind of piece of advice would you give them to, head down a similar career? What are your kind of best tricks of the trade, I guess?
Yeah, I think my recommendation would be to reach out to a local clinic and to try and get in and do some observation or volunteering.
Okay.
I think, healthcare may be unique in that those opportunities are really aplenty. And so they're actually required for a lot of the applications, a certain number of observation hours. And so you really kind of know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
So really try and find as many different practice settings and get some observation that way.
Awesome. Well, I want to open the floor if there was anything else you wanted to touch on. I don't know if there's any, special events that are going on with the VA or anything. If you wanted to mention anything, now's your opportunity. Otherwise, I think that covers all the questions I had. So
yeah, I think the only thing that I would mention just briefly is a plug for our rec therapy programming and adaptive sports.
Oh, okay.
And so we have a really robust kind of local programs that are offered, and we have great community partnerships.
Awesome.
And so you name it, our veterans are probably participating in it at some level. And so,
right.
We have adaptive scuba diving that occurs.
Wow.
Adaptive kayaking, cycling, bocce ball, bowling, archery, so many different programs. If there's an interest that a veteran express, our rec therapists will help them, get engaged in that activity. And the cool part about that kind of local engagement is that it serves as a catalyst to participation in some of the really big national VA programs. And so there's a number of different national programs. A couple include the National Veterans Wheelchair Games, the National Disabled Veterans Golf Clinic, the Disabled Veterans Winter Sports Clinic. And so these are really impressive programs, and we often get patients who will fly across the country to participate in these events. And
awesome.
Really, I think I get a lot out of it.
Cool. Yeah. Well, awesome. If there's nothing else, I think we're going to wrap up here.
I think that's it.
Perfect. Well, I just want to make a shout out to everyone who's watching or listening at home. If you're watching on YouTube, maybe give us a subscription, hit the bell icon so you know when new episodes drop. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, you could always give us a follow. But other than that, on behalf of MCPF and Spinal Cast, Ryan, I just really want to appreciate everything that you do for the nation's veterans, but also the whole SCI community. And it's been awesome to talk to you today. So
yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, thanks a ton. Absolutely. Thanks.